All right. Good afternoon, everybody. We're back on One American's Perspective. I have another guest today, a very dear friend of mine, Renaldo Miller. Renaldo and I served together in the Air Force. He's a senior non-commissioned officer still, combat controller by trade. He's one of the finest warriors that I ever have had the opportunity of meeting and working with. He's a fantastic father and a dedicated husband, and somebody that I've had a lot of respect for. So I wanted to reach out to Renaldo today, and I just essentially gave him the gambit of topics that he might be able to offer some insight into. And after talking with him some, we decided to discuss the matter of policing in America today. Obviously, the last few years, there have been some major events that have sparked quite a lot of controversy. You're thinking, Michael Brown, what, about 6 years ago, George Floyd a few years ago, and then a litany of others on top of all other types of issues. Not pertaining to the death or homicide of any individual civilian, but just general policing issues in the U.S. So, Renaldo, welcome to the show, and thank you very much for coming on today.
Yeah, man. Thanks, Nick. I appreciate it. And just like any other time, man, it's always good to catch up and talk with you. And that's kind of the vibe I want to put out. This is just another conversation between you and I.
Yeah, this time there's a little red dot saying that we're recording. So
yeah,
let's get into it, man. I know you got kids napping, and you'll have to wake up and play the dad soon. So the first question I have for you is kind of a two-parter. One is, what do you think the role of law enforcement, like big picture, state, local, federal level, what do you think the role of law enforcement is in America? And then how do you think we are matching that standard? Our police forces at any level that you see fit to answer are meeting that ideal standard?
Yeah, so I think for that first question, I actually think that's where the complexity starts, because in the name, it would inherently be to enforce, any established and well-known laws here in the United States, whether it's federal, local, or state or local. So in the name inherently, that kind of explains it. But to me, that's where the complexity starts, just because I think that we have an abundance of laws, or I should say an overabundance of laws in the United States in most places. And now I know, it'll break down from federal to state, and then each state is going to have, its plus or minus off of what we'll just call the average. But whenever I initially start to think about policing, I'm like, well, if you make, everything a law or everything illegal, then yeah, you need policing all the time, because people are likely going to do something illegal, whether intentionally or unintentionally. So that's kind of where the complexity starts for me, because yeah, inherently, I think in a well-organized society, you need kind of the checks and balances that law enforcement can provide. So.
Okay. And given that, I mean, you've almost answered it, but I'd like to get a little bit more in depth. And so one of the challenges is there's almost an infinite amount of laws. So at any one point, any law enforcement officer or office could essentially be, there's more laws to enforce than they have the capacity to enforce them. So right there, you have like a stratification issue of, well, which ones am I going to focus my limited and finite amount of attention and capability on? So that's one issue. What other issues do you kind of see with law enforcement today, maybe outside of just a purely time-driven one in terms of their resources to match demand?
Yeah. So real quick, let me kind of keep going with what you just mentioned. So
please,
you kind of mentioned just the infinite number of laws that we have here. Well, I would say that part of that, and I'll go into this a little later, would be culturally, like what do you learn, or like as a police officer or a law enforcement agent, like how do you learn, or what do you learn when it comes to enforcing those laws, or what is important, or your interactions with people whenever they are or are not breaking laws, as you perceive it. So that, again, very complex. I know that. And then, sorry, real quick, what was the second half of your question?
Essentially, like, what are some other ways that you might see that our police forces at any level are kind of missing the mark, rather than just like, well, they have more work to do than that can be done?
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I'm not a law enforcement officer, but I am in the profession of arms, like you mentioned when we started, and so there are some simulators there. One of the things that you know as well as I do that we harp on quite a bit in the military is culture. And so
Mhm.
that's one of the things whenever I see things in the media, and some of you have to take for, a grain of salt, or you want to have a little more information before you make judgment. But just, policing culture, whether it's the
Yeah.
overall culture of, our intent for police in the United States, or it's an individual department's culture, either or,
Mhm.
just kind of what is that culture? Because that's one of the first things that comes to my mind
Mhm.
when I see an incident that's being highlighted. It's like, all right, well, either, on both sides for that civilian and that officer, kind of what was your thought process going into that interaction? What were you trained to do? And again, like what's your baseline, your foundation culture of how
Right.
this interaction is going to go down?
Yeah. Yeah. When it comes to the culture and how prepared is really, you're speaking, it sounds like to me like you're speaking to the preparation level
Yep.
of the individual officers and the collective to be able to go out and enforce those laws. So the how they go about doing that. And, like, this, and for those that don't know, like I come from a family of law enforcement. So
Mm-hmm.
father, uncle, mother, they, a cousin of mine just became a trooper in the state of New Jersey. Um, and I know that they wanted to serve, and they served with good intentions.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes we see negative or poor intentioned officers doing things, or I think even more frequently, truthfully, somebody that just the situation got away from them,
Right.
if they are found in the wrong at all. And I think we as a society underestimate the difficulty of the situations that they find themselves in. Like having talk about serving in the military and the profession of arms, it's almost easier, I think, for the military in a way, because you have good guys and bad guys,
Right.
to oversimplify it. And those bad guys, oftentimes that we're employed to go out and deter, to beat whatever the mission may be. Um, they don't have American citizens' rights, like a long list of constitutional rights that we need to make sure we uphold and defend. They have human rights and, Geneva Conventions and other international laws, but they're not as stringent as American citizens' laws. Not that that's a good or bad thing, but now you're placing a lot on any individual officer, and things get tough really quickly when the rubber meets the road. If they're dealing with someone or multiple people day after day after day after day that are presenting a problem to them, and they're afraid for their life. And how do we prepare them to go about going into that environment, and how do we reinforce them day after day, and what does the culture of their community and culture uh, of the force that they work on tolerate in terms of the behavior?
Yeah.
um, Go ahead, you look like you had something to add.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, because you started to talk about the differences between the military and the
Mm-hmm.
police, and I mean there are some very, very huge differences. For one,
Mm-hmm.
like you just mentioned, day in and day out interactions for police. Well, in the military, like we deploy, you'll
Mm-hmm.
go into a theater of war or a theater of conflict, and then you come back and you have an opportunity to kind of come
Yeah.
down off of that.
Yep.
Whereas, police, I don't know what their schedule is, Panama schedule, however it works, but you essentially never leave the theater.
Mm-hmm.
You just have your planning days in between, just like we do for our missions, and then you take off and you're right back in it. So, I
Right.
mean, just thinking about being on a military deployment without an end date,
Mm-hmm.
how that could affect you mentally. So, obviously empathize with police that are in high crime areas,
Yeah.
or I'll just say areas with high rates of interactions
Mm-hmm.
that may not go as well.
May
And then
not go positively.
yeah, absolutely. And then the other part of that is, like I mentioned a few minutes ago, is just the cultural part. So you talked about, when we go to a theater of conflict, like those, you're right, like those aren't Americans. And what I explain to some people, the way I explain it, and this is just my one American perspective on it, is like I'm not obligated to care about the people that we're in conflict with.
Right.
However, I am, I'd like to think that I am a good person. So I know that what my job is, and it is
Mm-hmm.
not to go there and inflict undue harm on anyone.
Right.
I'll do my job. I will, as we say, eliminate a target if
Mm-hmm.
necessary. But I mean, at the end of the day, I'm doing it because it's my job, not because, of any ill intention.
Right.
So, and that's that's a military cultural thing, a soft cultural thing that we pick up, and I'd say that we do a fairly good job of cementing that in our guys. And again, even so, similar to law enforcement, we have those outliers. We always say that 10%. I mean, we have people that break the rules and break the laws, whether it's here in the States or while we're overseas somewhere.
Yeah, and you're bringing up something that I think is paramount in this particular issue, and that is the caliber of people that are recruited in these positions, and the level of integrity and character that they have. And I don't remember when I was first faced with this question. Maybe it was in college in a class or something, but it always has kind of stuck with me. Is like, do we expect a different standard of ethics and morality from people who are serving in positions such as law enforcement, such as in the military, where they have a great deal of power, especially when you get to the escalation of force, and the ability to take life lawfully, especially. So if they have that out, like, do we expect a separate set of characteristics, a separate ethos than we would expect of Joe Schmo, who's an accountant, who doesn't have to deal with that, the weight and the balance of that type of decision making? And I remember thinking then, and I've only been more convinced of it as time goes on, that I don't think it's a different standard, thou shalt not murder type of thing, the most highly trained soldier and Joe Schmo working in accounting. It's wrong for both of them to go out and unjustifiably take life. That is wrong. The difference comes in where that highly elite soldier or airman is more realistically they're going to have more pressure applied to the situation, where it will be more likely for them to deviate from that high level standard that we have from them, which is why the training and the selection and the caliber of that individual has to be almost beaten into them, because the cost of deviation from that standard can have tremendously horrific outcomes, when you're talking about losing life. And that goes, I think, a lot to the character of the individuals, like yourself very much included. I know the way you described, you're going out as a professional to do this, and it's not to do undue harm, it's to do your job, to protect everybody, and to inflict a minimal amount of damage as possible. That type of character is exceedingly rare. And I wonder how much, and I don't know the answer to this, how much that is screened for. I know it's screened for in SOF. I don't know how much it's screened for in law enforcement. And the last thing I'll say before I let you jump in is, I had this mentality for a few years, and I think the general populace has it, which is like, oh, yeah, law enforcement is basically the same as the military. You can just transfer one for one, and there's a lot of military influence in law enforcement, and there are a lot of similarities.
Right.
One of a big one that is extremely dangerous is when we look at them as just door kickers that are just prepped to go kill anybody they meet, and to defeat the threat no matter what. It's like, that is one of the last type of things that we want from a law enforcement officer, because when you're a hammer, everything's a nail. And if we're just hiring hammers, then what do we expect? I don't know that, maybe some departments do that more than others, but I can see how that's a dangerous thought process that I know I fell into, and I'm sure others do, where you see, look at law enforcement, what they're outfitted with today. They look, the SWAT teams have seemingly just as good as tactical gear as a lot of the tier 2 operational units that I see. It's like, well, is their mission really that the same? Like, what does that say about how they're attacking the problem, so to speak? So that was a lot. I'll let you kind of jump in, bud.
No, you just pointed something out right there at the end. So I just went to a NFL football game this past weekend with my wife, and we're sitting in the stands. So obviously I'm a paranoid veteran, so I'm looking around. But I made a comment to my wife that there's a lot of law enforcement presence, and I was like, oh, that's cool. And we both were like, yeah, that's good, because they're out there doing their job. They're not even watching a game. They're literally doing their job. So there's a lot of professionals in there. As we're leaving, however, we're leaving and walking and making our way back to where we parked at. There was a separate unit of law enforcement from the local sheriff's department. And just like you just mentioned, they likely had some of the same kit that I have as a military member that I would wear in theater, and some of the same weapons, same communication equipment, and the same uniform, which as I'm walking by, I'm like, that's ridiculous because you're standing in the middle of a concrete parking lot in multicam.
Woodland multicam. You stand out. I
Right.
see you.
Yes, like we can definitely see you against all these solid vehicles. But so I understand that there is a time and a place for a unit like that.
Right.
Maybe at the football game, maybe not. It's just, the optics of it are part of it. And then going back to the culture and the mindset, well, if you outfit somebody that's, trained to do the same thing that myself or, maybe even some tier 1 operators are trained to do, and you give them that mindset, well, our job is, in some way, shape or form to go eliminate the target. And like I said, it's not no obligation to care about it, just to do things lawfully.
Yeah.
And I don't think that that's the right mindset when you're here in the States.
Right. I absolutely agree. I mean, so Americans' rights to me are paramount. And first and foremost, law enforcement has to recognize that they are there to protect. I mean, it's on all the vehicles, right? It's a cliche thing, to protect and serve. Neither of those say to enforce the law to make as much money for the county as possible. Like when I see, I mean, Southern Georgia is the worst place I've ever seen. I'm sure you've driven up the I-75 corridor. Like, there's been speed traps there for years, purely, and I cannot see a reason why that is. Not for the safety of the roadways, because if that was the case, it'd be everywhere.
Right.
But it's to make money for the county. And that is a form of extortion. And you see that type of mentality creep in where, and if I was a law enforcement, I was like, hey, I'm just doing what I'm told. I'm here to do my job. I'm doing it well. It's not like they're being mean to the people, but now you have, this is where I really think I want to drive home like an empathetic point of view. This is where the rubber meets the road on a lot of systemic problems come together when police officer A meets citizen B, and based on a lot of circumstances, everybody has autonomy over their own individual decisions. And I know you're going to talk about that in a second, and how they interact with other people. They're ultimately responsible. That's not to negate any of that. But we represent systems, we represent ideologies. And when these ideologies and these systems come into conflict, it's like no wonder that a spark can set off a major issue. And to me, it does speak to, well, do we have some ideological and systematic problems with how one views the other side and what they're representing and what they're after? In my mind, if in fact they're remembering to protect the citizen and the individual and their rights first, in a perfect world, and I know things go wrong, that would alleviate a lot of the issues that we see. That it's not for the good of the county, it's not for the good of the force, it's for the good of the citizen. And that's why our tax dollars pay for you to enforce the laws that our lawmakers, who we've also elected into office, are to protect. It all revolves around the individual citizen. So I'll kind of open it up there for you to talk about now, kind of transitioning into, well, the culture of the police force to the culture of individuals, and what part they play in holding the police force accountable and interacting with cops writ large.
Right. No, that's definitely a very difficult thing to do, because even looking at selection and assessment, or assessment and selection in the military, like we again going back to our little saying of 10%, there's always going to be some that get through. But I want to tie two things together real quick, because I do think that they go hand in hand. So I mentioned culture earlier, like culture, whatever it is, through the police academy, through your department. And then also, like you just spoke about, traffic or traffic infractions, traffic officers, state troopers, what have you. So whenever I think about the culture, I'm like, all right, well, do you need more time? Do you need more time with the people that are training you? Do you need more time to really understand what your job is? So, we were overseas for a little while together, and you saw different forms of policing. One of the things that I did appreciate was that a lot of the countries didn't have like traffic police, as we'll call them, like we do here.
Yep.
And they use electronic means, CCTV, speed cameras. I wouldn't even consider them speed traps, because it's going to be there every day, so it's going to be there. But to me, like if we were to take a step forward as part of police reform, police reform has a negative connotation, I think, because of the media, but as a way to prepare our police. Prepare our police for the next day better. I would say, man, like, how can we get back some of their time? How can we be more efficient? So maybe we start to lean on some of these other things, because it is about to be 2023. You can get an HD video feed off of just about anything,
right?
And use some of this technology to get some of that time back. So then you have more time for training on how to interact with people, whether it's a good interaction or a bad interaction. And then that may even change the perception of the civilian populace, because you're not, getting caught in those speed traps all the time. Then it really is truly up to you, because again, like, you'll know that those speed cameras or devices are there. So it really is just on you whether you decide to speed and then pay that fine at some point. So I think that's it. I'm always looking at ways to train better. Being a senior NCO. And better prepare my guys. So I'm like, all right, well, what are some of the things that I've seen just from my point of view?
Yeah, to create efficiencies. Okay.
Right. Yep.
From kind of, we're a little bit at the halfway point. So from an individual's perspective, like, how, this is the other question I had, like, how do you teach your family? I know we've had this discussion offline, like how you raise your children and how you personally interact with law enforcement, both good and bad. If you have good interactions, bad interactions, and how do they oftentimes treat you? Like, what have your interactions been? And it doesn't necessarily need to be story times, but just like top type of like interactions. Where's your personal experience with it?
Yep. So first part of that, me and my family and what I teach my kids, and this is just in general, because we don't spend a lot of time talking about police activities in the house, but it's just respect others, but make damn sure that they respect you. Like that, I'd actually say that that's number one. Like, if someone is not, presenting you or presenting themselves to you in a respectful manner, then it may be time to just walk away and cut ties with that person. So, but then again, you have to reciprocate that respect. So that's just human interaction in general. Be kind, but don't be taken advantage of. And I also teach my children that when or if the time comes, defend yourself, hands down, and don't stop until somebody bigger than you can pull you off. That's what I tell all my kids. So, but so going from that to myself, my wife, as far as interactions, I will say I've probably had a wide range of interactions. I've had to, walk up to the car, hey, sir, how you doing? And talk to me. I've also been pulled out, accused of having illegal substances, held for several hours in handcuffs on the side of the road after being pulled over for loud music. So I've had a pretty wide interaction with police officers, but I personally think it is an individual thing. I understand culture, but going through, an assessment and selection process like I have, and seeing, what it does for some people and what it does for whatever program it is, there was still the found that, like, I'm who I was before that. I'm still that same person. That just means that I checked all of those boxes that were required for that assessment and selection, but I didn't have to change myself, or they didn't have to create me. I showed up as me, and I met the standards. So I think it's the same way for police officers, like, and whether or not that selection process needs to be reformed or not, I don't know. But so people are making it through that selection process, just like they make it through, ones that you and I have gone through. And there's going to be a percentage of them that check most of those boxes, but there's a bunch of other boxes that aren't on that list that also need to be scrutinized.
Right. And I'll go back to, I think, your point. Individual character matters most. And at the end of the day, like, you're dealing with a human being, and more often than not, if you show respect, they often will respect you. And
or I mean, if you just take the take the high road. I mean, and I try to put myself in that position. If I'm issuing a ticket and someone's being belligerent, like, I don't think it really mattered to me that much. I'd finish writing the ticket, and there's rules. If they don't want to sign the ticket, there's something to do after that. again, just following protocol. Like I don't think that I would be the type of person to reciprocate any escalation.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's just an individual thing, though.
Yep, and that you're absolutely right. That like that's why they call it assessment and selection. It's not called shaping. It's not called programming. The training comes after to make sure
Right.
you have the raw goods and materials to mold into a more effective insert whatever your job is to make a more effective combat controller, to make a more effective police officer. I don't know, and this is where I think our mutual ignorance comes into play, having not been in domestic law enforcement or military law enforcement for that matter, about how heavily they have to assess and select. I mean, the reality of the situation is like it costs a great deal of resources to do that right. They spend a lot of time with the military has a lot of time and a lot of money to make sure that they're putting the right people. And as you mentioned, even they still get the wrong people. So they still get it wrong sometimes.
Right.
But and we've talked about, this is kind of a whole nother subject, but it is tangentially related in terms of how you raise your children. And I think it does come back to the family and how you're taught and how you carry yourself as an individual. The interaction that you have with most people will be painted because of that to include law enforcement and vice versa. The people that find themselves in uniform, if they were raised in a household that was taught to respect individuals' rights, respect individual people, and that their job is a higher calling to make sure that they protect that, I think you get, men and women that are, God bless them, because we need them. And because we as a society collectively think that it's a good thing to have, everybody when they get in trouble, everybody calls 911, because they need somebody to come help them, and they're hoping that that person that shows up. But at the same time, there's a difference between a need for help from somebody who's willing and able to do that, and somebody who's kind of tyrannically enforcing laws that you don't necessarily, not that you don't agree with, but that are kind of superfluous. I once had a professor tell me something I think I've shared with you, kind of just from a leadership perspective, never put policy above people or rules above reason. And that to me has painted most of how I try to interact with people, is like, rules are good, but there's always deviation from the rules that is necessary. And you need to be able to think on your feet and remember, kind of the value of individual people in order to do that.
Yeah, those rules are there as a guideline. Like that's to kind of help you assist with the kind of the moral dilemma that you might find you're in whenever you're interacting with someone. And there's just they're your left and right limits, as we say.
Right. All right. So I'm going to throw a wild card question at you that I didn't prep, but I just kind of want to ask you in closing, is if you're king for a day type of question. If you were a king for a day, what would you like to see kind of policing look like in America? And like some changes, if you have any, and then how do you think you would go about doing that?
Yeah, that's funny because I was going to ask you that too. So we had the same wild card question.
I beat you to it. I don't have to answer. This is my show. I don't have to do the hard questions.
Just hang up on me. If I were king for a day, we'd take what we call a tactical pause, and just and look at what is our intent, what is our as we say our vision and our mission statement for policing in America, and then get a lot of smart people around me, because even in my profession now, I recognize that I'm not anywhere close to being the smartest person in the room. So you want to surround yourself with smart people. So surround myself with, the right people, so that we can analyze the data that we have, and then formulate, the direction that we want to go in next. Because I don't follow, policing history or, how different departments change when a sheriff, is newly elected. But it seems from a civilian standpoint that policing hasn't changed much in 30 years or so, except for more, as they call it, militarized. Going back to those guys, like that's what I've seen from a civilian perspective change the most. So, go back and look at it like, all right, well, society has definitely changed. People change all the time. Expectations, the way we communicate changes.
Yeah.
So let's figure out, do we need to alter the way that we approach our human interactions and for a better outcome? So that'd be number one. And then number two would be instilling and hammering home a culture of just that guardian mentality. Like you're here to help, bottom line. Like whether the person is willingly accepting your help or not, which you have to kind of take down upon yourself to figure out when to back off. But your sole job is you're here to help, and making sure that our selection process better identifies those type of folks. And then also lastly would be accountability. Accountability for those that don't meet that standard, or the accountability for those that choose to not do the right thing, during human interactions or during investigations or what have you. But accountability, as you know, same in the military, accountability is key. Like without accountability, you're giving 18-year-olds machine guns and shoulder fire rockets, and without accountability, like that could go really bad really fast.
Yep, absolutely.
So those would be my biggest things. First, just taking that tactical pause, letting everybody know that, hey, it's coming. I want to take some time to analyze, the data, the situation, and how things are being approached now, and then find the areas that we can become more efficient in, whether it's, better training, longer training, a little bit less time out in the field, as we would call it, finding ways to be more efficient with the time. So, yeah.
I agree with everything you said. I'll add a few things.
Okay.
The one is it's unfortunate that law enforcement officers find themselves having to uphold laws that they may not necessarily agree with, but I certainly don't agree with. And you know what? That's for a topic for a whole nother discussion. They're not the lawmakers; they're the law enforcers. So that is. I feel for them and having to do something that they might not necessarily believe in. So putting that aside, and reform necessary there in terms of just the sheer bulk of laws that we're now forcing them to to uphold. One, I mean, realistically, to attack the better training, assessment, and selection, you have to pay them more. Like the pay that they get is, I mean, cheap is cheap. Like you get what you pay for, type of thing. And if you want high quality individuals, you have to pay high quality dollars. And that's just the nature of the business. I said I feel for I always think of when I was living in Las Vegas. Police anti-police sentiment has been building over the years. You talked about our culture surely changing. I think that's been a part of it. In response to it, is that this was I don't know 5, 6, 7 years ago, I guess. Two cops are having lunch at a CC's in Las Vegas, and some psychopaths come in and shoot them while they're eating lunch. Like, in my mind, that's beyond acceptable. Unacceptable doesn't even begin to, like, these are public servants that you're damn right we expect a lot of them, and they should be held accountable when they deviate from the high standard that they do. Those that don't, which I think are the majority, at least the majority of the time, they stay within the parameters of the expectations set for them. There's no, we cannot as a society think that that's okay. The murdering of these people, likewise, the abuse of power that they have, that's also not okay. So we have to try to, how to balance that. I know that's a really broad answer. Like you said, no one man, no one woman, no one person, and probably no one organization is going to be able to change that. But if we focus on the individual rights of all American citizens in this country, and have empathy on both sides for what everybody's going through, maybe skinny down some of the laws that we have, that we are forcing them to enforce, change that mindset of the militarization, which I think you're absolutely right. Like I think about old pictures I see of my dad and my uncle and what they carried when they were, on foot patrol or whatever, compared to the kit that these guys have today, is like, well, there's a reason we have guys like you wear armor when they go down ranges, because they're expecting to interact with somebody who's going to try to kill them, and that sets off on the wrong foot. And it's a hard thing to win, but this is America. This is not the streets of Fallujah. And how we go about solving that is much more complicated than you and I think can.
For sure.
Solve.
For sure. Yeah, I know I don't have all the answers. I have a bunch of questions, just, like probably most people do. And I mean, I think that speaking for myself and speaking for you just a little bit, like I have a bunch of questions because I want to get to the best outcome. Like I want
Exactly.
I want what's best for my community. I want what's best for my country as a whole. And yeah, just better environment, better place to raise a family. And that's the genesis of all of my questions.
Yes, sir. And thank you for coming on the show and kind of sharing that. And I knew that you and I, at the end of the day, I spent enough time together where I know that we both want the same thing. And I thank you for helping kind of talk out. Not that we came to any like striking conclusions or anything like that, but it's good to hash out. And for anybody that's watching, maybe help you think about how to interact with people. If there's any police officers watching, maybe help think about like what we as citizens would like to see from you, and that we have love for you. But when you step into a position with significant power, great power comes great responsibility. And so we just have to hold ourselves accountable. Yes, sir. Renaldo, thank you again. It's been great catching up with you, and I hope we do this again soon. We'll pick another wide topic that will be totally unable to get to the bottom of in any amount of conversation. But it's good speaking with you, brother.
Yeah, man. Good catching up with you as well.
All right. I'll talk to you later. See ya.
All right. Take care.